Week 6, buys and sells. We got 5 players we're buying, plus some reissues from previous weeks, and a few players that we are selling. The guys that we've talked about in previous weeks that are still really good buys right now. Derrick Henry, coming off another down game. He did find the end zone, but not really productive. CeeDee Lamb coming off the injury. Brian Thomas Jr. still kind of not playing at the level that we know Brian Thomas Jr. is capable of. Teteroa McMillan getting the targets, but not necessarily the fantasy production. And Rashee Rice, another good buy, given that he's coming off of the suspended list after this week's game. So, Danny, you want to kick us off with the first guy on your list as a buy?
Yeah, my first guy is Drake London, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons. And I struggled. I mean, is he really a buy low right now? Obviously, going into the buy, had his big game over 25 PPR points, but he is only the wide receiver 23 in points per game. And maybe the person that drafted Drake London kind of views him as a sell high, says, hey, he wasn't very good in the first few weeks, has that big game in week 4, now just has his bye week. Now's my time to sell. That could be the rationale for somebody with Drake London in your league. And to be honest, the way I view Drake London is more similar to what he did in week 4 rather than the first few weeks of the season. Because when you look at the overall usage of Drake London, he has a 28% seasonal target share. This is the definition of an alpha wide receiver. And the big part of it here is Michael Penix bounced back in a big way in week 4. We saw what he looked like week 3 against the Panthers. They struggled, 30-0 loss. Michael Penix, there was big time question marks leaving that game. Week 4, he has that good performance. He plays well against the Washington Commanders. The team has their bye week. And now coming out of the bye week, I'm extremely bullish on Drake London. He is my wide receiver 7 rest of the season. And the main reason why I'm so bullish on Drake London is the usage that we have seen from him when Darnell Mooney is healthy. Because we saw in week 4, prior to the bye week, the main question mark in the first few weeks was Drake London. He did his damage out of the slot in 2024. When are we going to see him return to the slot and dominate like he did last season? Obviously, week 4 for Drake London coinciding with a 25-plus point performance. 5 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown out of it came out of the slot. Realistically, the way I view this offense moving forward is if Darnell Mooney's healthy, he is capable of playing on the outside. And if he's going to be capable of playing on the outside, we should see Drake London used across the formation. The way I kind of liken Drake London's potential usage would be similar to a Puka Nacua, would be similar to a Monter St. Brown. Get him in that power slot role, let him be the engine of your offense, and we saw what that looked like in week 4. And I think personally, we see Michael Penix continue to hyperfixate on London.
Yeah, it's the one challenging thing about London a little bit is that last year, for example, Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts combined for 28% of the team's targets. This year, they're up near 42%. So there is a lot more, I wouldn't say target competition necessarily, just the way the offense is running. It is going through the shorter passing game a little bit more than it was last year. And part of that could be the offensive line injuries that the Falcons suffered or whatever the case is. But I think the main thing for me, why I would be buying on Drake London is that we saw week 1, he was about to get out to a great start, and then he suffered that shoulder injury. I think he's going to play a little bit better going forward because he might have still been banged up. And after the bye week, he may have gotten a chance to rest up there. And like you said, we did see that big performance before the bye. So yeah, generally speaking, I think the Drake London manager feels better about him before the bye after, the big performance. But I think you're probably not getting wide receiver 1, mid wide receiver 1 price tags for him for most people. So you could still probably buy him for high-end wide receiver 2 type of production pieces.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people are going to see wide receiver 23 points per game, but coming off a big performance, and that's going to incentivize them to sell. But realistically, in the 2 most healthy games for London, and realistically, the Atlanta offense, because I mean, as we know with Darnell Mooney, also suffered his own shoulder injury, has the bye week to get healthy. I really do think having Darnell Mooney on the field enables this offense to use Drake London the way they want to. Because if Darnell Mooney's not on the field, you simply can't use him across the formation because who else is going to play X?
Yeah, and London finishes a wide receiver 1 last season too, even with Darnell Mooney having, a really good year. Darnell Mooney had a good year last year. Him and Kirk Cousins had a better connection really than him and Michael Penix have shown to have so far. So you feel pretty confident that London's still the alpha here. Anything that Mooney and Pitts and Bijan can add to the situation are probably just going to give him more red zone opportunities, more big play opportunities. And maybe Penix, plays better after the bye as well. Because we saw about two or three of those games before the bye. He wasn't exactly sharp, had a couple of good games, but for the most part, he's still a young quarterback getting experience.
Nice little get right spot. Should be a high scoring game environment against Buffalo this week.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the first guy that I want to talk about here is Jahmyr Gibbs. And Gibbs is very similar to I talked about Saquon a couple of weeks ago, where Gibbs has been great. He's a guy that I'm sure people are happy that they drafted him, but there's been like kind of better assets going where he was going in fantasy. So maybe the opposing manager is kind of frustrated that David Montgomery has outscored Jahmyr Gibbs in fantasy 2 of the last 3 games. But what the manager may fail to realize is that kind of Gibbs and Montgomery are always going to be like this. This was kind of the expectation coming into the year where they're going to ping pong weeks. The Lions play the Chiefs and Bucks the next 2 games. Those are lots of points and games in which both of those defenses are more susceptible to pass catching running backs. The Chiefs are top 10 in targets and receptions allowed to the running back position. The Bucks are top 3 in receiving yards allowed to the running back position. So it's not going to be cheap when you're buying Jahmyr Gibbs. He was a first round asset. He's producing at a top 5 point per game level at the running back position. Both of us know that Jahmyr Gibbs with David Montgomery on the field is like an 18 to 20 point per game guy. And if anything happens to Montgomery, who's like 28, 29 years old, Jahmyr Gibbs will win people leagues. So if you can use assets that are very valuable, like a DK Metcalf plus a Saquon Barkley to go get Jahmyr Gibbs, like a Christian McCaffrey tier down into Jahmyr Gibbs, T. Higgins if you need a wide receiver, like a Bucky Irving, Jalen Waddle to go get Jahmyr Gibbs, Emeka Egbuka, Cortland Sutton to go get Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, I love a lot of the assets in those deals, but Jahmyr Gibbs is a different animal.
See, the thing with Jahmyr Gibbs that's so fascinating to me right now is you can make the case that he's about exactly what somebody would have expected right now. 19 PPR points per game. If you drafted him in the top 5, you're probably feeling content with him. I wouldn't say you're going to get him for 90 to 95 cents on the dollar. I'm more so saying that the dollar that you would pay right now might be worth $1.30 in a few weeks. Because with Jahmyr Gibbs, the main thing that I've noticed in these first few weeks that wasn't even evident last season, he's on about an 80 target pace. Last year, he only had 63 targets, and he was the RB1 in fantasy and averaged over 20 points per game. So if we're equating it out, the main difference between Jahmyr Gibbs this year versus Jahmyr Gibbs last year is just simply the success in the ground game. Again, 4.64, very efficient, but he was at 5.65 last year, 5.19 the year before. Again, maybe partially because of the fact that, you don't have Frank Ragg now, you don't have Ben Johnson calling the shots. We have more of a rushing ceiling to be able to capitalize on here because he's only gotten 14 carries per game. I think down the stretch and more competitive game environments, when the Lions are going to need to rack up wins, especially against NFC contenders, we're going to start to see Jahmyr Gibbs maybe get closer to that 15 to 18 range. And if we're getting 15 to 18 Jahmyr Gibbs carries on this type of offense, with this type of efficiency, with the type of bump in usage that he's gotten in the receiving game, we could be talking about a legendary level season.
Yeah, exactly. We're kind of buying low on the fact that he's been really good, but not excellent so far. Like I said, if it's 90 cents on the dollar, I don't mean from what he's produced so far. I just mean from what he could be down the stretch. And we've also seen Jahmyr Gibbs in every season of his career be better down the stretch than he's been at the beginning of the year.
100%. I mean, after the bye week, if we're looking at competitive game environments, Minnesota, divisional game, that's going to be a competitive game environment, even outside of the fact that Minnesota, of course, a good defense. Washington, going to be a competitive game environment. Philadelphia, going to be a competitive game environment. Green Bay, Dallas, the Rams, the Minnesota Vikings in week 17. Those are all must-win games for the Lions to the point where we're not going to have a scenario where they're up 35-3 and we're trying to get David Montgomery a touchdown because his sister's in attendance.
Yeah, exactly. Cincinnati and Cleveland the last 2 weeks. I don't know if we're going to see a stretch of games like that for the rest of the season, really, where you got 2 cupcakes. And like I said, the Chiefs and Bucks are the next 2 teams on the radar for them, which are Super Bowl contenders, legitimately. So those are teams that you definitely need to be producing against. So moving into the next group of guys that we have here, and this may be a little bit bag defendy on my part, but I do think that this is the primo week to be buying the Baltimore Ravens in general. We already talked about Derrick Henry as like a reissue from last week, but the Baltimore Ravens in general, so Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson, the 2 other major fantasy pieces on this offense, I think they're about to pull a 2024 Cincinnati Bengals, where if Lamar is out for this game against the Rams, which it appears trending in that direction, they are probably going to drop to a 1-5 record, and then they go on bye week in week 7. After the bye, the Ravens have the Bears, Dolphins, Vikings, Browns, Jets, Bengals, Steelers, Bengals again, Patriots, and Packers. 7 of those 10 matchups are bottom 12 against fantasy quarterbacks. And a lot of those teams are winnable games where the Ravens will be implied for like 25 points and that kind of thing. This team will have to win probably 8 of their last 10 games to make the playoffs. And they're going to have to score on offense. And Lamar should be slinging it to Zay Flowers, whose underlying metrics, when we just talk about him specifically, prove that he's breaking out. We haven't seen that elite point production since week 2, really, because of the Ravens' injuries, some of the bad luck that they've had. But he has 2.60 yards per route run this year, 81.4 PFF receiving grade. Those are both top 6 marks for wide receivers. And he's got that elite schedule, high scoring game environments. And Andrews is actually being floated by some Ravens beat reporters as potentially a trade deadline candidate, which would open up some targets for Zay Flowers as well. So if you can go get Zay Flowers, who I still view as a top 15 wide receiver rest of the season, for a guy like Kenneth Walker, for a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., Garrett Wilson, Jalen Warren sold for Zay Flowers and ETN. That's a running back upgrade in that deal for a wide receiver downgrade. These types of deals I would be willing to do. And then when you look at Lamar and some of the trades that you can get him for, Breece Hall types, I mean, if you need a quarterback and you have running back depth, I think that makes sense. Travis Etienne, same thing. This like Derrick Henry and Jawan Jennings for David Montgomery and Lamar deal makes sense as well. He's one of the few like elite needle moving quarterbacks that you can get right now.
So maybe people will take this as a negative for Derrick Henry, which again, you take it for how you will. But the clear 3 to 4 worst defenses in the league this year, and I don't think it's a debate, are the Dallas Cowboys, the Baltimore Ravens, the Miami Dolphins, and the New York Jets. Outside of those 4, like you're looking at, okay, maybe the Raiders are very strong against the run. New England Patriots are getting Christian Gonzalez back. Even the Cincinnati Bengals have been a better comparative defense to what we've seen with those 4 that I mentioned. And as I've talked about with Dallas, hey, if your defense is going to give you 30 to 35 given up every single week, you're going to have to produce on the offensive end. We know what Lamar Jackson is capable of. We don't even have to go through the schedule. We don't even have to go through the matchup implications of having a bad defense, because even prior to him getting hurt, he was a 27 point per game type of guy. So if you can get Lamar Jackson for a discount, go and do it. Zay Flowers, like you mentioned, if the Baltimore offense is going to have to line out wide, it's going to have to play more 11 personnel, it's going to have to maybe even try to claw back from 14-0, 21-7 type of holes. You can't just simply run an I formation and give Derrick Henry 25 carries a game if your defense is allowing 28 a game.
Yeah, and the betting markets kind of bear this out too. The Ravens are still like minus 200 to make the playoffs, even though they're a 1-4 team about to be 1-5. And the reason for that is the betting markets kind of understand that they're the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to score a lot of points. And like I said, you kind of made the connection as well. When your defense is giving up points, a la the Cincinnati Bengals last year, and you need to win games, you need to basically win. Like there was a point in the season where Cincinnati could not lose another game. Like they had to win every single game down the stretch. And that's why we saw the sun run from Jamar Chase, from T. Higgins, and from Joe Burrow, and from Chase Brown, where they're just constantly scoring and they're constantly having to put up points. And my argument here is like, if you're a 3-2 or better record, you're 3-2, you're 4-1, you're 5-0. Go and trade for Lamar now. Go and trade for Zay Flowers now, because they're probably going to have another game where Lamar's out and Zay Flowers is probably not as productive because Lamar's not out there, and they have their bye week in week 7. So by week 8, if you can handle a loss or 2, or maybe you have enough depth to get by, you might get that best is yet to come production from Baltimore down the stretch.
Yeah, 100%. Now, we talked about Derrick Henry. He's a buy low, of course. The one thing that does worry me, of course, is if he doesn't have those positive game scripts like maybe last year. Baltimore, a much better comparative defense last year versus this year. I am a little bit worried because, of course, as we know, he doesn't contribute in passing / third down situations.
He doesn't, you're right, but he also does have some favorable game environments that are coming up. Like I said, the Bears, the Dolphins, the Vikings, the Browns, the Jets, and the Bengals are the next 6 games for the Ravens after their bye week. And all of those games are games in which the Ravens should be favored by at least 3 to 5 points.
Yeah, I mean, we'll end up seeing what happens here. I will go to my next player, and you mentioned bag defendee with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm not only defending my bags, I'm downright the only person left believing in these bags. Travis Hunter. I'm not saying go and buy Travis Hunter for top 24 wide receiver price tags, top 30, maybe even don't even buy him for top 35 price tags, because I don't think you're going to have to pay that much. Realistically, what I look at with Travis Hunter, he's a type of asset where if you're making a move and you can tack him onto a deal, he would be the upside free roll, because realistically with Travis Hunter, he's seen his route share increase in back-to-back weeks, and he has 2 straight weeks of over a 20+% air yard share. For reference, in weeks 2 and 3 combined, that was only 16%. So when it comes to Travis Hunter, I'm not saying, oh yeah, he's a startable fantasy asset right now. I would much rather have to stash him, have him on your bench. When you know you can play Travis Hunter is the moment that we see the routes continue to go up. If he can get back up to that 80+% route share player, again, we saw 74% this week. We saw what the highlights look like. down the field, making plays at the catch point. Even, a little dump off in space, he's making people miss. The the talent is on display every single time this guy touches the football, and yet his value right now is basically non-existent. Like I said, I'm not saying go and trade a boatload for him, but if you can get him tacked on as a free upside stash, what is it going to realistically cost you to get Travis Hunter on the market?
Yeah, there's so many things like heuristics that we follow in fantasy football that point to Travis Hunter having a much better second half of the season than he has the first half of the season. Number one, he's learning multiple positions, so that's going to take some time. Number two, the Jaguars have their bye, I believe, in week 8. So after the bye, he should probably have a little bit more, skin in the game under his belt and that kind of thing. Number three, rookie wide receivers typically produce better at the back half of the season than they do at the front half of the season. And number four, and most importantly, in my opinion, is you look at when rookies flash like this, when they look that good, it's coming at some point. The fantasy production's coming. And before the fantasy production comes is when you need to buy on Travis Hunter. So I know you can't go too over your skis on this one because you're the Travis Hunter guy and you have so many bags of him. But I didn't have nearly as many bags as you are. And I agree with you. I think that he is a very good buy low right now because Trevor is playing a little bit better. They got a big confidence boosting win against the Kansas City Chiefs. Brenton Strange is now out for the next month. So that's also something that would factor into the target share of the team. Jahmyr Brown is also banged up. Brian Thomas Jr. still, we're kind of waiting for him to produce at the level he produced last year. I really do think that the second overall pick is going to start to look like the second overall pick in the next coming weeks. I don't know when it's going to be necessarily, but like you said, if you had to pay, like in one of these trades where you see Devontae Adams, no way I would pay that, obviously. No. We're not paying something like that. But if you have to pay Tajay Spears, Troy Franklin, a down tier from Jacoby Myers to Jennings and Travis Hunter, which I think is probably the most realistic trade that you can see here, that's exactly the type of upside you should be banking on a 5-0 roster, a 4-1 roster, a 3-2 roster.
And let me ask you this. So I'm not sure if you saw kind of the highlight that went around, but there was a play at the end of the game with the Jaguars. Obviously, not going to harp on it too much. The Jaguars ended up scoring the game-winning touchdown, ends up not mattering at the end of the day. But there was a specific play at like the Chiefs' 35-yard line where Travis Hunter was wide open on a skinny post and Trevor just missed him. What do you think the narrative is of Hunter if he has a 35-yard touchdown tacked onto a 3-for-64 day?
Yeah, I mean, it would be probably pretty bullish, especially considering by PFF grades, he was the highest graded player both on offense and defense for the Jacksonville Jaguars on Monday night, which is a pretty insane thing to do as a rookie. So the light bulbs are starting to go off for him, which is something that we all expected to happen, because one thing that you couldn't say about Travis is what he was not a smart player. Like you have to be a very intelligent player to be able to play both sides of the ball. And I think eventually it is going to click for him and we're going to see the 20 fantasy point performance and then the buying window will be closed. He was the second pick in the draft.
And maybe this is narrative-y, but like if you're Trevor Lawrence and you see your 185-pound wide receiver go up and catch a contested pass down the field with two guys on him, like does that not just increase your trust that you can throw him the ball down the field now?
It should if it doesn't. So yeah, definitely on board with that buy, especially in deeper PPR leagues, start 3 wide receiver type of leagues. He could end up being a league winner down the stretch. Trey McBride. We don't really talk about tight ends very often, but Trey McBride matters. So we got to talk about Trey McBride. Trey McBride right now is producing 12.3 fantasy points per game or 12.5 fantasy points per game. Nobody in the world is more anti-elite tight end than I am. But this is kind of also why I'm anti-elite tight end, drafting them at least, is that you can sometimes get buying windows on these guys. And I think right now is the perfect buying window on Trey McBride because all the underlying metrics are there. We know he's one of the best 2 to 3 talents at the position. That obviously goes without saying. His route rate is the highest in the league at the tight end position at 94%. His target share, highest in the league at the tight end position at 26%. And he's also second in utilization score at 85. His next 4 games are 29th, 26th, 22nd, and 23rd against fantasy football tight ends. So I do think this is the optimal primo window to be buying Trey McBride right now, because I know Jake Ferguson and some of these late round tight ends are producing right now, but I do think in the next coming weeks, we're going to see Trey McBride reestablish himself as the best tight end in fantasy. And if you can get him for guys like Devontae Smith, like wide receiver 2-3 types, that is definitely going to be more beneficial to your starting lineup when you can get a needle moving tight end. Jalen Waddle types. You could see here Ashton Genty and Dallas Goedert sold for Jordan Mason. Trey McBride's probably a fair deal, give or take, but I do think it makes sense to go and buy Trey McBride right now because he has 4 of the easiest 10 matchups in fantasy the next 4 games.
Yeah, and you know who he plays in week 17, right?
The 49ers?
Cincinnati Bengals.
Oh, right. I forgot. The week 17 matchups from best ball season, they fell out of my head with all the stuff going on for the rest of the year.
Yeah, no, all jokes aside, though, with Trey McBride, I mean, right now, he's not producing like a needle moving tight end. He was drafted to be a needle moving tight end. And somebody might be fed up. Like, realistically, how much on top of like Sam Laporta would you have to pay to get Trey McBride right now? Sam
Probably
Laporta
not that
coming
much.
off a
How
big
much on
game.
top of Jake Ferguson would you have to pay for Trey McBride right now? And even if you
Well,
wanted,
I would
okay,
rather
how much
Ferguson
on
than
top of
Laporta.
Tucker Kraft or Tyler
Yeah.
Warren or one of those guys, would you have
Yeah.
to pay for Trey McBride right now?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I would prefer like both the guys you just mentioned, like pretty comfortably to Laporta, but I would be willing to do it. Again, I do technically have those guys like ranked very high, but Trey McBride is still my tight end one, especially with the information right now with Brock Bowers. We don't really know what's going on with the knee week to week. I mean, we're hearing a lot of negativity come from Pete Carroll's mouth, which maybe if that was how the knee injury was, you probably shouldn't have just played him right away. Like, I don't know, that's a wild concept.
Yeah, wild concept indeed. Yeah, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, guys that are producing. Maybe you could take like a wide receiver 2 type, like a Cortland Sutton, plus like a Mason Taylor, if somebody wants a tight end in return in the trade, and see if that's enough to get you to a guy like Trey McBride. So yeah, he's absolutely somebody I'm buying because I do think he will be still a positional advantage the rest of the season. He's getting the targets, he's getting the routes. He just hasn't really scored a lot of fantasy points at this point in time. And it's not really for any reason other than him and Kyler just haven't connected. I think his catchable target rate is also like one of the lowest of all the tight ends in fantasy right now. So for whatever reason, there's just all the throwaways and the bad throws are going to him.
Yeah, well, exactly. But we can move on from our buys. We can add on to ourselves. And I'll start it off at the top because obviously, after what this guy did on Thursday Night Football, big topic in the Flock League, of course, he was involved in a big time trade with editor Nick and Avery. I'll mention the trade in a second, but I do think Kyren Williams is one of the bigger sell highs in fantasy right now. And I don't mind him. Like, he's my 32nd ranked player. But the reason why he's a sell is when I went to the expert rankings on the site, he's currently listed, Corey, 23.5. He's listed as a top 24 asset in fantasy football. And look, I get it. Again, career high day, look great, over 30 PPR points. But I am a little bit concerned that this is sustainable for Kyren Williams because coming into that game against San Francisco on the season, he had 11 targets, 8 receptions, and 52 receiving yards. Against San Francisco, he had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 66 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Like, this was very clearly his best game as a receiver out of the backfield that we've seen in his career. And he also peaked in terms of the snaps. He played sub 80% of the snaps in 3 straight games. But after we see Blake Corum fumble, Blake Corum kind of riding the pine after that, we see Kyren Williams handle 91% of the snaps. Basically, the way I look at Kyren Williams is similar to what we saw in those first 4 weeks. It's just because we got that inflated week 5, his market value's kind of risen. Like, if you can sell Kyren Williams, in my opinion, for a top 12 running back type of price tag, if you can flip him straight up for Javonte Williams, which, funny enough, was the main topic in this deal because a lot of people viewed Kyren versus Javonte as a downgrade for Avery to get Javonte, but I have Javonte ranked straight up over Kyren Williams. And to be honest, if you can still get Javonte plus for Kyren on the open market, I would definitely go and try.
Yeah. I'm a little higher on Kyren. I have him at 27, so he's a little bit closer to the expert ranking mark there. But yeah, I do agree in principle that when you get a guy who's more of like a high-end RB2 for me rest of season, for potentially even mid RB1 price tags on the open market, but definitely I would say low-end RB1 price tags, you could probably sell him for. Like, if you can get a Mecca Buka for him, I would absolutely do that. If you can get Zay Flowers plus Jamison Williams for him and you have a lot of running back depth, I'd be comfortable doing that. If you could tier up using Kyren Williams and Michael Pittman Jr. to get Saquon Barkley, I would do that. I mean, this deal is just completely outrageous. Getting Nico and Alvin Kamara for Kyren Williams will probably never happen. But even if you could just get Nico straight for him, I would probably do that as well. So yeah, definitely a guy that's a shop. I wouldn't say he's necessarily a sell, but I think he's definitely a shop. See what your league mates think of him.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like, Javonte Williams might still get the stigma of, oh, he wasn't very good in Denver. It's like, that Javonte doesn't exist anymore. If you can get a plus on Javonte, do it every single time.
Yeah, no, for sure. So moving into my sell, and I have Stefon Diggs here, and it's kind of for similar reasons that you have Kyren listed as a sell, because I actually like Stefon Diggs rest of the season. I think he's a pretty solid riser over the last 2 weeks. But how often are we going to have Stefon Diggs coming off of a Buffalo Bills revenge game where he gets absolutely peppered with targets and he has back-to-back 100-yard games? And he's still a 32-year-old guy coming off of an ACL injury. And I do think he's still volatile week to week as far as his route participation is concerned, because he only ran like 64% of the routes against the Bills. He just got so many friggin' targets. Like, when you're coming off of back-to-back 100-yard games and you're Stefon Diggs and you're a huge name, you've been fantasy relevant for so long and everybody knows who you are, I feel like this is an opportunity that you can take Stefon Diggs, plus another asset and go get an absolute stud. Go get an absolute superstar. Take Stefon Diggs plus Michael Pittman Jr. Go get Nico Collins. Take Stefon Diggs plus Kyren Williams and go get Ja'Marr Chase or CeeDee Lamb or something like that. Like there's going to be leagues where you can take Diggs because he's Diggs and go and get high-end assets as a result.
Be careful. You're going to get Mason in my DM sending me offers of Tony Pollard plus Stefon Diggs for Drake London.
Yeah, it's happening. It's coming for me too. He's going to send me Stefon Diggs and Travis Etienne for Bijan.
All jokes aside though, I agree in principle. Like he's a big name, especially in casual leagues. If you can sell on the high that he's done these last 2 weeks, obviously do your due diligence. I'm a little bit higher than you are. He's my wide receiver 27 rest of the season. So if I'm selling Stefon Diggs, I would need a legitimate set it and forget it wide receiver 2+, or I would need a running back that I can put into my lineup every week, top 24 level guy. I wouldn't just sell Stefon Diggs just to sell him. Like if the best offer I'm getting is about, a wide receiver 27 to 30 type of price tag on the market,
which is where I have him ranked, by the way. I just assume you'll be able to sell him for more.
Correct. Like, again, that's the principle of it. If you can sell him for a top 24 price tag at running back or receiver, you do your due diligence. If you're only getting, hey, you know what? I don't know if I want to get all in on Stefon Diggs. He's still old. He's, didn't really do well in the first few weeks. If that's the sentiment you have when you're trying to put Diggs on the block, keep him. So it really just depends how your league mates kind of perceive him. But like Corey said, in more casual leagues, they're going to see 40 points. They're going to see the name brand of Stefon Diggs and might be able to pay up a premium.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So also he won't be playing me every single week in my home league like he was last week, because that's also a bonus of Stefon Diggs, is that when he plays me, he goes off. DK Metcalf is the last guy that we're just reissuing because we did talk about him last week, but it's important to reissue him now because here's the selling pitch. If you're 3-2, if you're 4-1, if you're 5-0, DK Metcalf might be a part of why, because he had a monster game before the bye week and, probably won you that week. Here's the pitch. If I was selling you DK Metcalf, Danny, and you were a 2-3 team or worse record or something like that, I'd be like, hey, him and Aaron Rodgers, they're building a connection. They're starting to get more chemistry together. You saw it before the bye. He doesn't have a bye week anymore. I just absorbed his bye week for you. So now you're going to have him for the rest of the season without having to deal with his bye and use him, DK Metcalf, plus another piece to go get Rashee Rice, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Bucky Irving, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, somebody like that, a guy that's a better asset, a better name that you can go get who's maybe hurt or suspended or underproducing or something like that. So some of the trades you could see here, like DK Metcalf for AJ Brown. I know the Eagles are a bit of a mess passing game wise, but I would still prefer AJ Brown. I would prefer Breece Hall that you can see there. DK Metcalf plus to go get Jahmyr Gibbs makes sense to me as well. So using DK Metcalf in a similar vein to what we just said for Stefon Diggs, a similar vein to what we just said for Kyren Williams, selling what I would imagine your league mates view as a mid wide receiver 2 right now, given how he produced before the bye and the fact that he doesn't have a bye for the rest of the season, for a guy who also is a mid wide receiver 2, except we actually believe they're a mid wide receiver 2, whereas Metcalf is more of a high end wide receiver 3 in my rankings. Like, can you sell DK Metcalf for Xavier Worthy straight up? Can you sell DK Metcalf for George Pickens, Tedero McMillan, Zay Flowers, Devontae Adams?
Yeah, and you actually have DK higher than I do. He's more of like a mid to back end wide receiver 3 for me. So if you can get that high, I absolutely would. DK Metcalf, man, like he's gotten 7 targets as his best in the season. He's gotten 2 games of over 5 targets. He has overall 22 targets in 4 games. Like realistically, we know what he represents. He's also not catching a majority of these targets. Like we're talking about 15 catches on these 22 targets. We know exactly what he is. He's like Jameson Williams, except the number 1 on his offense and a much worse offense.
Yeah, exactly. And he wouldn't have a 23.6 fantasy point per game day in week 4 if it wasn't for a blown coverage as well. So just take advantage of that. If people didn't watch that game, especially, you could definitely take advantage of that. So again, it's not that DK Metcalf's a terrible asset. I mean, I have him like if you're in a 3 wide receiver, 2 flex type league, he's an every week starter for you. I just would use him to tier up to a guy who's underperforming, who's better, like AJ Brown, like Zay Flowers, like Mike Evans, who's injured, like Rashee Rice, if you can add another piece, like Xavier Worthy, like Tedero McMillan, or some of those guys.
You want to hear a crazy comp? DK Metcalf is like a tight end with wide receiver eligibility, because what do we say about tight ends that aren't like the Trey McBrides? They're touchdown or bust. DK Metcalf, if he does not score a touchdown for you in your lineup, is a bust, because there's so many wide receivers you can say, hey, even if they don't score a touchdown, at least you can get 6 catches, 7 catches, 8 catches in the game. It's like DK Metcalf has 1 game with 5+ catches this year. Like, it's not like he's going to give you that sustained floor every single week.
It was also against the worst pass defense in football in the New York Jets in EPA per play allowed as well. So like you're looking at a matchup and a team that's not really going to be throwing the ball a ton. They also have Jaylen Warren coming back from injury. They're going to stick back to the run and stuff. So while Aaron Rodgers and him could develop more of a connection, it's possible they connect on more of these big plays and whatnot. He's still going to be what he is, which is a high-end wide receiver 3 who's going to be boom bust on big plays and touchdowns, which is exactly why I'm trying to tier up from DK Metcalf. So those are our buys. Those are our sells for week 6. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Updated rest of season rankings, our trade calculator, our My Teams feature, all the tools that you need to help win your leagues, make some league-winning trades, and help continue your success if you're 5-0 or you're 4-1 or you're 3-2, and help you bounce back if you're 2-3, if you're 1-4, or if you're 0-5. Hopefully we can get you that first win. But check that out. That'll be linked down below in the pinned comment and in the description. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.